Okay, so welcome to this panel discussion. So maybe I'll just set the stage for what I was hoping would happen, and then you all can continue in whichever direction. We've invited for a panel here a few people who have done research in neuroimaging, spent time in neuroimaging, and then now are each in different kind of extra academic endeavors and sort of have taken their career in various directions. And I think it's really interesting to hear about how their work in the intersection of neuroimaging and data science when they were doing neuroimaging research, how that informed their decision-making process about how they thought about what they would do next, what they're doing right now, and just to hear about sort of their experience in decision-making process. And then, of course, we'll open it up here for questions from everyone. But I thought we'd just start maybe with just introductions. And so what I'm going to go one by one here and just point to you and say, hey, just introduce yourself, maybe talk a little bit about the kinds of things you did when you did neuroimaging, and then the kinds of stuff that you're doing right now. I know for some of you that still is neuroimaging, but how those things sort of progressed, how your decision-making process to go to where you are right now progressed, and so on. So I'll start with alphabetically Anisha.
Cool. Hi, I'm Anisha. I used to be Ariel's postdoc at the University of Washington a few years ago. Now I'm the lead data scientist for MRI at Octave Biosciences, which is a startup with around 30 people, and we're a multiple sclerosis care management company. And as part of the ways to manage MS care, we use MRI scans. And so I lead the neuroimaging part, the data science of the neuroimaging part of our company. Yeah.
And maybe Anisha, when you were in doing your neuroimaging research in academic environments, how did you sort of get to?
Oh yeah, so my research interest, that's relevant. My research interest, I was really interested in kind of translational neuroimaging. How could we take what we're doing in research and bring it to scale such that we can study much larger cohorts of people? And one of the main problems I ran into is that a lot of neuroimaging relies on like looking at the data, right? You run segmentation, you look at the data. And if something's wrong, maybe you drop that subject from your analysis, or maybe you go in and you click on a control point, and this fixes the segmentation, because at the end of the day, you want really accurate measurements of these brains. But now that we're starting to collect larger and larger data sets to answer more, interesting questions about the brain, it became really unwieldy because you couldn't quite scale this type of protocol, right? You can't hire an army of undergrads to like sit there and look at all these brains and click control points. So my research was about kind of bringing the best of both worlds together, bringing in computers and humans and building interfaces so that we could scale neuroimaging research. And it fits in so well with a company, because what we're trying to do now is essentially the same thing. We try to generate MRI reports with quantitative information. So if you're a patient with MS and you get an MRI scan, not only does your radiologist say, well, you have lesions, but you can say, well, you had 5 lesions last year. Now you have 2 new lesions and one of them is enhancing. So it's surprisingly difficult to do.
Great, thanks. I'll go next to Chris. Introduce yourself, sort of your background and what you're doing now. So.
Hey, my name is Chris, and I used to work in neuroscience for around 10 years. I started with clinical neuroscience, did some cognitive, and eventually ended up doing a lot of neuroinformatics, working on projects like Open Neuro, fMRI prep, BIDS, and all sorts of cool things that hopefully make life easier of various human cognitive neuroscientists. And then I transitioned to working in the industry. I started consulting for Cloud AI, Google Cloud AI. And then I switched to full-time role as a software engineer, first in research, and then later in Google Analytics. And most recently, I switched again within the company to a product manager role. And I'm in a product manager and attribution, which basically looks at correlation between different advertising activities and their outcomes, and how this could help advertisers to spend their money more efficiently. So that's my background and a little bit of color into why switch and how this whole thing happened. I've been always interested in kind of organizing and figuring out how technical products, technical solutions can help, and how can we maximize their impact. And I've been applying this subconsciously in my projects quite early on, and I learned it's actually a thing, and that could actually be a job. And that's how I eventually ended up becoming a product manager. But I think that some of my late work, especially with coordinating initiatives like data standards, is very similar to what I do right now in terms of figuring out who are the stakeholders, what are the needs, and prioritizing things to spend people's effort most efficiently on the things that will make the biggest impact. I can talk more about this, but that's all from me for now.
Great, thanks, Chris. And I'll go to Tal next.
Hey, I'm Tal Yarkoni. Until about 2 months ago, I was a research associate professor in psychology at the University of Texas at Austin. And actually, some of you probably know this, but I was also helping out Ariel for several years before that with this course. So I kind of abandoned him in his time of need, although Noah probably has done a far better job than I could. So it probably worked out better for everyone. But so I used to do neuroinformatics stuff and work on all kinds of open source tools. And the last 2 months, I've been a senior data scientist at Twitter, working on the notifications team. So if you get push notifications on your phone saying so-and-so is tweeting about you, don't blame me, but I'm on that team. Yep.
And you started off in psychology, right? And ended up
Yes.
sort of in neuroinformatics at some point.
Yeah, although I guess I sort of still always thought of myself as a psychologist. I've never really been interested in the brain for its own sake. For a while, I thought of the brain as maybe a good way to try to understand some of the questions I was interested in. And part of the transition for me was sort of realizing that maybe the brain's not really a good way to get a grip on some of the things I was interested in, or maybe those things are not that interesting. And so, yeah, that was part of my transition.
Okay, and we'll want to hear more about that soon, but maybe I'll move to Teon now.
Hey everyone, Teon again. So my background is in linguistics and psychology. So I got into cognitive neuroscience through the linguistics realm. And I was really interested in language and like how language is like processed in the brain, or how we process language, and whether I was interested in the brain or not, like Tal just brought up, was an interesting question that I still am trying to answer. Like, do I want to answer it through the brain, or is there other ways that we can just look to see how the mind is processing? So I got involved with, say, open source software development with working on MEG data. So I did my PhD research in MEG, trying to understand how can we relate eye movements that we record. So taking the cognitive psychology approach of just like eye tracking during reading, and trying to say, hey, how do we link this to MEG research, where we're measuring magnetic field activity from the brain every millisecond. And it actually is a difficult thing because like having, like, say, psychologists trying to handle like a signal processing thing isn't like typical, like in a lot of departments. So I got involved with developing the software at M&E. So M&E is for MEG and EEG data analysis. And it was actually out of a need that we had a very bespoke MEG system, and it required like about like an hour to an hour and a half of just like pre-processing, just getting your data out of the software into a format that could then be read by one of the softwares. Would take about that amount of time. So I got involved in my second year with just like, one, learning Python, two, reading other people's code to try to make sense of what they're doing, and three, contributing it to an open source project. And it went from like taking an hour and a half for one file to like a few seconds. And then I really got like addicted to like the whole press the button for a pull request to be accepted, and got involved with the community, and then kind of just like branched more into just like doing software development instead of like more of like the research stuff that I should have been doing during graduate school. But it's all cool because it got me a job where I am now, and I'm actually pretty happy about that. And how I got from where I am now, where I'm working at Mozilla, And where I was there was that I started to build on like M&E and understanding like how can we start standardizing data, especially in EEG and MEG. And I did a lot of just like writing the converters to read the data into M&E, and then that got me involved with bids. I saw that there's bids coming to MEG, and I just kept poking around. And I was like, okay, I have opinions, like very strong opinions about this. And then I kind of got involved with the project, and that kind of led me into a brief tour into neuroinformatics, working on MEG bids, working on M&E bids, creating the software to write to the spec. And I had to just make a decision if there's going to be a space for me to continue doing this line of like software development. And I didn't know what the state of like, say, academic data science would be 5-10 years from now, because it didn't seem that anyone in the linguistics or psychology department particularly cared for the type of stuff that I was doing, even though they were using it. So Mozilla actually paid for like my postdoc, and I spent a year at Stanford working with Russ, and that's where I got to meet Chris and a bunch of other people. And then I saw that they were hiring a data science as data scientist, applied, got the job, spent the past 3 years as a data scientist, and now I'm doing product management. And I'm actually doing product management of like heuristics and machine learning. And I'm happy to talk about that more, because it kind of just like ties into like what I was doing in graduate work, but now with the browser. I'll stop there.
Very cool. So I'm curious to hear a little bit more maybe about kind of like how people think about decisions that guided their career here. We heard a little bit about that from Teon just recently, and thinking, when faced with, the possibility of transitioning into industry, how did you come to that? In Chris's case, for example, you talked a little bit about the fact that you did it a little bit gradually, and I'm curious to hear about that a little bit. Just like how were you thinking about the decision to then, in your case, transition into fields pretty far from neuroscience and data science?
I can speak a little bit about this. Later, I've learned this is actually a good thing to do intentionally. However, it happened to me very accidentally. A friend in the lab didn't want to go to a conference that happened in San Francisco. She had tickets and she gave it to me, and I went to that conference. And that was I believe that was Google Next, which is a cloud Google conference. And that's where I've met CEO of Kaggle, which used to be a startup doing ML competitions and basically a big data science community, which was acquired by Google. And we started talking, and he was very interested in data sharing, especially in the academic world. And that's how I ended up consulting for them, basically writing strategy for trying to help this community using the stack they have. And that was my gentle introduction to the world of Google. It's quite quickly I realized that I really like this world and I would like to be part of it. And then I started working on how I can transition full time. I still had to go through the normal interview process. But I was able to find a team that would start working with in research from within that, and that helped a lot. And there are some other things that kind of contribute to the decision whether to switch careers. And one thing for me was realization that you can do a lot of impactful, cool work outside of academia. Especially when you're working in basic research, it's sometimes difficult to actually see that impact, because sometimes it will take decades, if at all, for it to make a big change. And I realized about myself that I like to see impact on a shorter time scale. And the other thing is that I hope others could speak to as well, is realizing that the long-term career paths in academia are fairly limited, and there is There's a lot of PhD students graduating every year, and very, very, very few actually open long-term positions such as tenure track. And when I went on the job market, which led to a successful job offer, I realized how few of those are there, and how it will be, even if for people who are successful in the search, how much of a trade-off you have to make in terms of what you might care about in life outside of work.
Great. Maybe I'll pass this similar kind of question on to Anisha, and how sort of how did you end up in industry? I know personally you went from a postdoc with me onto a research position.
Yeah.
Eventually.
So actually, I met the founders of my company before I started my postdoc with you. It was my final year at grad school, and I was getting my PhD at UCSF. And I was in the neurology department doing neuroimaging research there. And the founders of my company were doing their research because they wanted to start a multiple sclerosis company. So they were talking to Steve Hauser, who was then at UCSF, and he's like a big deal in the MS world. And so at the time, he was really excited about what I was working on. And so he showed it to Bill and Melinda, our founders. They're not Bill and Melinda Gates. They're just happen to be named Bill and Melinda. And at the time, I was just very against the idea. I had a bias against industry and startups. And I just thought that if you wanted to do translational medicine, if you wanted to find a way to get neuroimaging to be used in a clinic, you should stay in academia, because that's where it's probably going to happen. This is what I thought. And I knew that data science had a role in this because obviously, in a hospital setting, there's a bunch of data to work with. So, I went and got my postdoc with Ariel, which was amazing. And then I realized that I was just wrong about industry. And so I reached back out to Bill and Melinda, and I visited the company just to give a talk, like not a job talk, just like a lunch talk for the company. And then I talked to everyone there. Everyone was really passionate and happy, and they all wanted to help people and figure out ways to, translate neuroimaging, not just neuroimaging research, but, research in sensors and wearables, research in like blood serum biomarkers that could potentially, track disease progression. So there's a lot of like avenues that we could help MS. And everyone there was very genuine. It wasn't like these are a bunch of people who like want to go make a bunch of money and don't really care about, these are people who care about patients and genuinely like want to make an improvement in the MS space. So to me, I just realized I was wrong, and then I wanted to give it a chance, and I'm happy I'm here.
Maybe one more question for me before I sort of open this up for more things is, talking to people who are in various stages of their training and considering where their career path will lead them. What are some things that you wish you had done more of, or things that you did do that you think, you talked about going to visit at a company and talking to people, and I've done similar things, and I found that to be really helpful.
Yeah.
What are some things that you would have helped you if you had done more of earlier on in your career?
I wish I had done like a small internship during my PhD at a company. I think that would have been really helpful. So I also want to say my company, we have 10% of our employees have been to NeuroHackademy because there are 30 employees. And if anyone is interested in an internship, so short internship at our company, please email me. It's just something I wish I had done because I had a bias that wasn't fair against industry. So yeah. Speaking of the things I did do, right?
You burned your hour off the treadmill.
I know, I'm just straight up. I'm sorry, but I had to, I think it's cool to have NeuroHackademy people at the company. They're a skill set that I had that NeuroHackademy teaches. So learning about Docker, learning Python, data visualization, machine learning, all of these things are extremely useful for doing good quality science, but it's also really important in industry because if you're building a product, it has to be a good product. It has to be reproducible.
Other thoughts about, things that you should have done earlier in your career and thought about earlier in your career from others?
I would say one thing, there was like such a stigma in graduate school just talking about industry. Industry was like the 4-letter word. And I think that that sentiment is changing, at least from, I have conversation with like recently graduated like PhDs and like those who are still in the program. And I feel like they're able to talk about it more, and departments are starting to like have space, as they should, to like train their scientists to be productive in any job that they see fit instead of ones that they are molding them to do. And it's more about having the PhD experience be about getting that foundational skills of inquiry and having those skills that can, because all of the things that you're learning now is useful as an early career researcher in academia, also going into industry. It translates super well. So it should be incentivized to teach these things and have these discussions, because it only will make the scientist a better person.
Yeah, I'll plus one all of this. In general, academia is a bubble. And if you can break this bubble by getting an internship or just hanging out with people who are outside of it, people in the industry, going to meetups, you will broaden your horizons, because no one will broaden them for you. Because the people who you probably are looking up to right now, your PIs and their PIs and like their sort of like academic parents, there are successful academics who don't know and don't care about this outside world. But this outside world might be actually a better fit for you from both professional and personal point of view. So broaden your horizons, whether it's an internship, whether it's hanging out with people in the industry, whether it's meetups or other things.
Last thing is that I also wanted to choose where I live. So that also led into my decision of like whether I wanted to continue an academic career or not. I'm back living in New York, and like there weren't as many options to just like consider. So that is actually super valid and should be part of the calculus in deciding.
I agree.
Okay, maybe we can open this up for questions from folks. Yeah, Hetty, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming to the panel. So I am a doctoral student currently at Cornell. So I'm going into my second year, so quite like early in my journey of this academia and research. But my advisor is actually very industry supportive because he himself has a lot of industry connections, people we collaborate with. So my question for you was, I understand that you almost had a gradual transition towards industry, and it sounds like your skills were almost better applied in the industrial world. But is there also something about academia that kind of made you want to leave? And is there something that you also miss about academia that the industry world doesn't provide you with?
I could take a stab at that, seeing as I'm freshly in industry. In terms of things that made me want to leave, I think perceived lack of impact is one, right? So, and I think this already came up a little bit, like, and this very much depends on what you're working, what time horizon you're comfortable with, but I never really got a sense that what I was working on was likely to translate into improvements in anyone's life. Now, obviously, that's not to say that you get a job in industry and, like magically, you have impact. I think the variance is higher. So you probably need to be selective and think carefully about opportunities, but I do think that there is the opportunity to have a much larger impact potentially, depending on position in industry, than in most areas, actually, not all, probably. So that's one. The other one is, like, I personally just kind of got fed up, honestly, of like the rat race of like trying to publish papers and deal with reviews, and when there are sort of clear alternatives that work much better, like just post your paper and people can read it or not, and and I'm not saying that that's not worth doing. It's just, for me personally, after like 10, 15 years of doing that, I just kind of got fed up and decided to try something else. And again, I think like one thing that probably is worth saying, academia is probably, the variance is probably smaller in academia. I mean, institutions are very different, fields are different, but still the variance is probably smaller than industry, right? And industry can mean like all kinds of things. And so I don't want to suggest that, you go into industry, you end up in a situation where you don't have to deal with annoying things like publishing. There's annoying things in every job, but I do feel in my position right now, and I think this may be true for other people in the panel, there's just less annoying stuff to deal with, right? There's just like not like a large chunk of your day that's taken up with dealing with all kinds of stuff that is sort of, you know, it's part of your job on paper, but it doesn't feel like part of your job. It's not what you want to be doing. And so that's been personally quite nice. I don't know if other people found the same thing.
I agree. I think, you know, there are parts of the things I was doing in academia that maybe weren't perceived as important, but then in my job are like mandatory. So it's nice to feel like, oh, when I build a Docker image so my code can run on any machine, that's part of my job. Like I definitely, like this is what I'm paid to do, and it's nice. I don't know that there was anything that made me leave academia. Like I guess the thing I miss about academia is, you know, when you're writing a paper, I don't know if you guys do this, but I didn't really have a deadline necessarily. I just like wrote a paper, and when I felt like it was ready to be submitted, I submitted it that day. When you're building a product, you have to like get it out. You have to kind of get it out to people and get it in people's hands. And then maybe they give you feedback on the product, and then you make some changes and you give it back to them, and you can't just take your own sweet time. So I guess that's the thing I miss.
I can also add something that, oh, go ahead, please.
Did y'all finish answering the previous question? I don't want to cut it short.
Go ahead, Chris.
I'll be brief, and then Svi, maybe can ask you a question. So one thing that surprised me, and it's different for everyone, is the work-life balance in the industry that was so much more natural, where people were basically working, and there was a certain time where people went home and they left work behind, and I think that made the whole environment much more healthy, and I really enjoyed that, and that being kind of a rule across the board everywhere, and it allowed me to think more about my life outside of work and my relationships and what I want to do in life in general. Gives you more breathing space for thinking, basically, and I really enjoyed that. I do miss people from academia. I made some amazing friendships with some fantastic people. Many of them are here, and that's definitely something I miss. Svi, what's your question?
Yeah, sorry. I guess I was really struck by, well, not Tal's answer from before, sort of the exposition for it, where you said you felt that your work wasn't impactful, and I'm you know, at least a little bit familiar with all four of your work, and it's all, to me, super impactful stuff. And then because I also don't know anyone from, I guess, the field that is not at least aware of each one of those projects. And I can't help but think that it's not a coincidence that all four of you are here. And in a sense, you all did things that were very impactful, but were not necessarily acknowledged in your institutions as such, in a sense, or not formally acknowledged in a way. And I was wondering whether, like, what are your feelings about that sentiment?
So I won't speak for the other folks. I personally don't feel that way, right? So I think actually, and you kind of touched this, I honestly feel like my work has been received probably better than I frankly think it deserves. Like I didn't really, you know, I never felt like people don't appreciate what I do. I felt, if anything, like people over appreciate what I do. I don't think it's that great. So for me, it's not really that I felt like my work, you know, I say impact, I don't mean like the people I talked to and interacted with didn't think what I was doing is valuable. It's more like I actually don't feel like there's any translation to anything that matters to people outside our little bubble, right? So now I could be wrong about that, right? This may be a personality thing and, you know, whatever, but, you know, it just, my sense was like, if you think of like MRIs, like this giant societal investment in a tool that should pay off in terms of dividends, in terms of people's, you know, health improvement and et cetera. The kind of work I was doing just in functional, I just never felt, I didn't see the payoff, right? And I still don't. And so that's all I mean. I mean, yes, people like the work I'm doing. That's great in one sense, but on the other hand, like I can't point to anything out there in the world and say like this has actually materially improved someone's life, and so that I think bothered me.
Kang, I see your hand is up. Do you want to ask a question?
Oh yeah, thanks everyone for coming. It's very useful. I'm Kang. I'm a third-year PhD who's actively looking for internships, but my question is very like specific. So I was always puzzled by what specific qualities do industry people look for from like us computational neuroscientists, because I know people who had like great publications in like NIPS or CVPR, and those are very appreciated. And I don't know, there's like coding skills, you know, and like the understanding of machine learning and like all those kind of qualities. I was wondering like what kind of quality is best shines from us, like when applying to jobs in the industry.
I think it's a little hard to answer because it really depends on the type of job and the type of company. So, you know, we want someone who's a really good fit, whose skill set like fit the specific job description we're looking for, but it changes, you know. So, you know, right now we're looking for someone who has experience working with blood serum biomarker, like has done research on blood serum biomarkers and can also has the data science skill set to, you know, find meaning in a lot of data related to blood serum biomarkers. So we want someone with, you know, domain expertise, which might mean, you know, a lot of publications, or maybe not, maybe just like one really good publication. I don't know. In other cases, we might want a generalist. You know, we want someone who can learn quickly and like bring a bunch of technologies together to like spin up something really quick, like to spin up a quick prototype to do something. So it really depends on the job. So it's hard for me to say like generally what to do. I will say like for a data science career, having good, you know, like data science skill set, which again is what is taught at NeuroHackademy, is good. But I would say that if you're looking for jobs, just spread a really wide net, because there's going to be something out there for you that's a good fit. You just have to find it. It's a big data problem.
Yeah, I guess for the product managers on the panel, I'm curious in particular to hear when you're doing your work on a day-to-day basis, what of the things that you do, you say, oh yeah, this is something that I learned when I was doing, you know, basic research, or when I'm doing research, and that now I'm using on a daily, weekly basis.
I'll just say, I could say a few things. One would be on the data science and data scientist role. I think it gotten so overloaded that now, like at least at my company, we're starting to break out the role of the data scientist in just like more descriptive terms. Like we have someone who's doing inferential data science, where we need them to do forecasting and like causal modeling work. And then we have someone who's doing product data science, which is more data analytics, data visualization, because the term just incorporates so many different concepts, including machine learning. Some companies say machine learning is second to the machine learning engineer versus in the data science role. So also just be able to look at the job description, and maybe if you know someone at the company, or if you see anyone in like the neuroscience community that might be working there, just ask them like, hey, what are they actually looking for in this role? Because sometimes the HR team does not really align well with the needs of like the team that they're trying to hire for. So getting clarity of like what data science means is super important. I got into product management. Now shift to product management. I got into product management because as I was working as a data scientist for like 3.5 years, I realized that I wanted to have more impact in the type of work that I was doing at a company level. So I was doing the analysis and that was fine. But then I had started to develop a very strong product opinion of like how things should go. And I had always came in with like a list of questions to every meeting, to the product manager, to my director. It's like, so why did we do this? And how did we decide that? And are we thinking about this? And I come to learn that that is actually the product thinking skills that like, at least like our like type of like product management like really cultivates. So where it's like getting, like really owning the life cycle of a product from top to bottom, like understanding what's the tech stack, understanding how the data feeds in there to help inform your decision. And that's what really led me to say, hey, I think this might be something that I want to do. And data product management is now like a growing field of, and it's still amorphous. We're trying to figure out like, what does it mean to build a data product? How do you power things? At least within Mozilla, other companies might have this really well formed and we don't. But we're now seeing like, okay, how do we create personalized assistance that is privacy preserving and balancing between whether you can do it locally versus server led or a hybrid approach to the two. And I think it's technically interesting and complex, and like that's something that I like to geek out on a lot now. So I get to talk to the engineers, I get to talk to the data scientists, I'm talking to the UXers and like, how do we design the product, and user research to say, do they even understand what this is if we like showed them this given property that's powered by quote unquote ML. So that's what got me into product management.
I can also add a few things. Product managers manage by influencing stakeholders. We don't manage people. And one thing I've learned in my later stages of my career is not only that I had a vision for making something happen, but also how to convey that vision and inspire other people to stand behind it. And this is very important in product management because you have to convince various stakeholders, engineers, directors, that this is something that is worthwhile building. And often you do it with data, and sometimes you do it with specific narrative. And it isn't that far from writing a very good paper or a very good grant. So I think that's very, very similar. And the other thing is that I think it's probably common between Mozilla and Google is that these companies are very data driven. So often we not only provide opinions, but back them up by data. So being very kind of scientific in how you convey information is important, and that's kind of comes naturally to all scientists, to basically making a point and then having a small descriptive statistic saying that like, oh, this is low priority because we just did this little query here and only impacts 0.05% of users, and we should focus on something else. So those two things, I think, the communication and the scientific thinking are definitely something that translate well into this role.
I'll just add one small thing, which is sort of the what may not translate well. So without taking anything away from what Anisha said, I mean, Anisha, I think, is very lucky because she's in a position where she gets to apply her domain knowledge. The vast majority of jobs that you're likely to be competitive for will not be neuroscience focused, right? So yes, there are some clinical neuroscience companies, there's pharma, but probably most of you who end up in the industry will end up at a tech company, and it's very unlikely, actually, I won't say never, but it's unlikely that you'll be drawing on much of any of your domain knowledge, right? And so that's not to say you shouldn't pursue it, but just to the degree that you're sort of looking ahead and you want to hedge your bets, there's probably a lot to be said for spending relatively more time on technical skills, programming, math, et cetera, statistics, and maybe less on sort of the really detailed nuances of the particular corner of the world you're working in, because that's very unlikely. I mean, you could get lucky, but it's very unlikely to get to take that research and translate it into like an industry setting.
I have another question about that.
Oh, hang on. That's the Thomas has his hand up, so I'm gonna.
Oh, sorry. I for some reason on Linux I can't see the kind of thing
Sorry,
at all on Zoom.
I'll keep you in mind. There are a few people here who have had their hands up, so I'll call on you. Thomas, please.
Okay, first I want to thank you, all of you, for being here. I wanted to ask about this transition between academia and industry. So I understand that all of you moved from academia at different parts or different points of your academic life. So do you think it would be possible to return to academia if you wanted to, or once you're out of the flow of academia, it would not be possible to return? So that's the question.
I think anything is possible. It's just a function of time, right? Like maybe if I've been out of academia for a while and I like want to get back in, maybe I should do another postdoc for a while and like publish papers. So do I think I could like jump into a tenure track position like now after not really having published a lot? I don't know, probably not. But if I really wanted to do it, I guess I would spend the time. I'm just happy where I am.
Yeah, it's the kind of thing I think very much depends on the stage of it you left, the field you're in, and what you've been doing. So in my case, it was kind of in some sense a no-brainer because I do have a reasonably well-established reputation. I kept my affiliation. I could always go back, right? Like if 3 months from now I decide, no, I made a terrible mistake, I could pick up exactly where I left off. There's really very little risk. Most of you are probably doing your PhDs or postdocs, so that's probably not an option. However, some of you are probably in computational fields where it is much more common to go back and forth. So in like in computer science and machine learning, you'll very often see people actually go back and forth between industry and faculty positions. And you'll probably know if you're in a field like that because you'll see it happen, right? If you're in neuroscience, psychology, much less common, and it's quite difficult. And so practically, I do think, I think in general, people should be much more open to opportunities in industry, but I do think there's something to be said for sort of trying academia first. And then, like if it doesn't work out, then because it is harder, I think in general, on average, not always, but it is probably harder to come back than to transition later on.
And so I have done some adjunct work. I taught a statistical programming class at American University. So what I see is that if I wanted to navigate between like the academic and industry space, professors of practice is a very like growing term of like those who have like industry experience that come back and like teach within the university. So you may have the title of professor of practice, or it may just be an adjunct professor. But those are some opportunities, but it's tend to be teaching oriented. If you're trying to get into like a research oriented role at a university, that might be more difficult to do. I don't know what the state of academic data science is at the moment. There could be a much more fluid transition between, say, industry and academia, but that's similar to like computer science, but I don't know if that's where it is or how it will evolve.
Yeah, I guess it's worth mentioning that there are roles in academic research. So let's say you spend some time, training in academia, then going out to industry, spending some time there. There are roles in academic research, such as research software engineering, where it's relatively, I think, easier to go back into academia to be close to academic research. But then most of those people are not driving research questions, rather they're providing a supporting role in implementing the kind of software that's needed in academic research. But there are people, here at the university, there are people who do those kinds of roles. And it's kind of a separate career path, but is in academic research. And if that's really where you're passionate to be, then you can end up there. Kai.
I'll add one thing just to that. It's just that I know there's a few universities that are experimenting with opening up like new hiring lines where your focus. So I know UCSD is actually looking to create like roles where you may be more oriented toward, say, software development, and like you get your cred and for doing like software development work and like publishing on that. So I don't know. It's an interesting space.
Kai, you had a question?
Yes, hi, and I'm a junior postdoc, and I just want to ask about job security. And actually, when Anisha, you mentioned about tenure track, this is really something that I want to ask, because as a junior postdoc, at least I can speak for myself. I want to keep the passion doing research, doing the science that I like, and doing good science. But there aren't that many opportunities upwards to be secured. So a lot of perhaps a lot of postdocs out there are thinking about the same question like me, of keep doing the things that enjoyable, but also being able to have a job that feeling secure. So the question I guess I want to ask is how you perceive job security versus, is this sometimes a contradictory thing, or how do you cope with it?
Yeah, I guess I feel secure in my job now. I like my company. I feel like there's a good outlook for it, but like, I don't know if I'm wrong. I'm pretty sure I could get another job somewhere. So in that sense, like, I think, I'm a relatively intelligent person. I work hard. Like, I'm sure someone out there will hire me. So that's how I think about it. I might not be able to do exactly like what I want to do, but maybe I'm wrong about what I want to do. Like maybe I just need to open my mind to doing some other things. Yeah.
Confidence, if I may summarize that.
Yeah.
The first switch is the
important.
hardest. So when you do this first jump, you will learn that you can do jumps, and then you learn more skills that are appreciated by a larger group of companies. So as Anisha said, this job security doesn't come from the fact that someone writes down that we're going to employ Anisha for the next forever, right? It's because Anisha is confident that her skills will be appreciated by a large pool of companies that will hire her in a case that she would have to find a new employer. So that's the difference basically between tenure track and having a set of skills that are desirable.
Yeah, I think I'll add to that. I think being in academia in particular right now really warps your sense of like how in demand your skills are, right? If you have a PhD and you can complete projects and you have data analysis skills, et cetera, you will always have career security. It's interesting to see, like, so like my wife is a software developer, for instance, and if you know any software developers, you will constantly be getting like LinkedIn messages from people who would just love to hire you because there's such a shortage of people, right? So the idea that, I won't say never, right, because weird things happen, but like the idea that you won't be able to find a job probably in the city where you want to live that pays well and has good hours, it's quite unlikely. I mean, if you can hold down a job for a year, you probably can keep doing it indefinitely. In tech, at least, I will say, that's not true in other industries necessarily.
Yeah, I like this exchanging job security for career security, which is in some sense more important than having this particular job. Right?
Yeah, I just want to add one thing, so I don't have time, but you probably know a lot of academics who did not end up living in a place where they want, or took a job that they're not entirely happy with, and they're kind of stuck, right? And so, like, yeah, like Ariel says, like you have to weigh like lifetime security in a job that you may not be happy with, and you may not want to always be waiting, years and years, thinking like one of these days a job will open up in San Diego or New York, and then I'll apply for it, and there'll be like 300 other people, and maybe I'll get it, right? So there's a lot to be said for not thinking just in terms of like, yes, I have tenure and lifetime security, right? So people talk about golden handcuffs in industry, but sort of like tenure is also its own kind of handcuff in academia because it warps your thinking into like, I have to do this, so I have lifetime security. And maybe you do, but maybe you don't.
Sarah, you have your hand up.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. My question is fairly broad, and it's generally, what is your current or past work environment like in these different teams in tech? I guess this like comes from my own perceived notions that like certain like teams within industry, like at Google or whatever, might not be as friendly to like diverse peoples in general, or like give them the same opportunities or credit them with their own ideas. So I was hoping you could talk about that.
Yeah, I've definitely been in situations where I'm like the only woman in the room. But it's kind of, there are good jobs and bad jobs in academia. They're like good working environments in academia where you'll be treated with respect. And then there are bad ones, but the same holds in industry too, right? So I don't know if on average, like one is better than the other, but just look for when you're interviewing for jobs, regardless of if you're in academia industry, just look out for people that are nice and let you speak and, maybe are diverse or have like a code of conduct or I don't know, some sort of like sign that they want to have a good working environment with you. I've been in bad situations, but I've also been in really great ones too.
I'll say to go into a point Chris made earlier, which is that the making that first transition from like say academic to industry, for me, I know that I was looking to just find a job and I luckily found a job that I wanted, but then after there, it's just that I want to work at a place that I really care about, like the culture, the people there, the people are nice and I care about like having like civil discord with their colleagues, like even like if you disagree, but you handle it in a certain way. Those are actually more important to me than whether it's like the name of the company that I'm working at. I think having like the good work environment is tantamount to like actually having some job satisfaction. There's been a lot of investment, especially with the racial reckoning in like the past like few years after George Floyd has passed. So that was just 1 year. But you see that there's big initiatives at companies. And it's the thing is like, are companies actually being held accountable to the things that they say that they would do? And then what you can do, you can go and look at their diversity reports to see have they actually made gains for their employees in terms of like, are they hiring more like diverse workers among like, they're both technical and non-technical staff. So it's good to look at the breakdown. How are they having representation at the leadership level? That's also very important because it really like leadership at like the senior is that really like help like shape the culture of the environment and really like make it either a good or a terrible work environment. So those are things that I would say to look at. And also just like, if you know someone who works there, you should ask them and be able to just ask if you're interviewing, it's like, how do you feel? Like, what is the work culture like? It's a really important question. And you can kind of read the tea leaves if they hesitate or not, whether they're giving you their true answer or the answer that you have to read within the lines.
I can add a little bit to this. Obviously, my perspective is biased in my own background, but I found it very impressive how many different kinds of people of different backgrounds and different history I work with, and how they all work together, and how they're all most of all kinds to each other. Whether we're disagreeing with kindness, and it's difficult to really explain how prevalent that is and how much does it change the discussions. But I have not experienced this like very heated, almost personal discussion that you might experience in science. And I really appreciate that about the environment that we have in Google. And I do want to emphasize the aspect of leadership, and that's something to look out for in terms of both middle management and higher management. I work with much more senior, very impressive people of all sorts of background in my own org. But even if you look at our C-level structure, at our CEO and CFO, very impressive people who do not fit the Fortune 500 whatever. I think there's like overrepresentation of people called John there. So I think it's a good place. It definitely has some work to do, as many companies, and it's aware of these problems, and I think the company is trying very hard to become better.
I think Zvi was first, and then Hedvi after. So Zvi, do you still have your?
Yeah, sorry again. I don't know why the raise hand feature is simply gone on my Zoom installation. I just wanted to ask, Tal, you mentioned before the, I guess, relatively marginal importance of domain-specific knowledge in almost any job prospect outside of academia. And I guess I was wondering, do you think if you still had the same technical skills you graduated your academic career with, do you still think you would have the same job opportunities if you did not have the same academic accomplishments, just the technical skills, in a sense?
I think so, yeah. Well, let me qualify that. There are lots of companies right now that will only hire people with PhDs in a technical field, often including neuroscience, just because they can, because there are lots of applicants. But I do think that, lots of people never get a PhD. They start and they just work their way up. And honestly, from an opportunity cost perspective, I think you probably would get to the same position faster if you didn't do a PhD at most companies. That's not true in all situations. Again, really fancy research labs, like Google, et cetera, probably you would not make it that far. But unquestionably, I think the technical skills dominate the CV and all the academic stuff. I'm not saying it doesn't matter at all, but I think if you can do the work, people are not going to care that much. You just might have to work your way up instead of sort of entering at a higher level.
Cool, thank you.
I would say that graduate school allowed for me to develop my technical skills. So that's where I learned to program in Python. That's where I got deeper into machine learning and actually understanding it. So for me, that was the trade-off. It's like I'm actually learning that in this space that allowed for me to have the skills that is now marketable outside of the space that it was like first for, like academia. Also, it's just like, just by trying to figure out how to say this. Having a PhD for me made it much easier for me to get a job as a data scientist, given a lot of the biases that are just among those who are hiring. So for me, it was unfortunately necessary to get that same type of position, and just unfortunately the same type of respect among people who are just reviewing it. So I think that the PhD still had value for me. Whether I could have learned that outside of a graduate program, yes, probably. Did the graduate program afford me that time and space to learn it? Even though my advisor didn't really like it, yes, it did give me that. So that's what I'll say.
I empathize with every word you said. I can only hope to end up in Mozilla.
We're hiring.
I think, like Tal said, I think some people use the PhD as a signal. This person can spend a few years really working hard on some problem, and that's just the signal for that. And it's not necessarily that important what the details of that PhD are, but for the PhD, you have to become an expert on a particular thing within the domain. You have to specialize. So it's a little bit, there's a little bit.
Yeah.
Or wake up 4 years later and realize you've become a research software developer without knowing it.
Awesome.
I will say that I have come across really super talented developers who did not even go to college, and tech allowed for that. So it's such a weird space, because you'll have cases where I was just describing, and then you have these other cases, and they became the IT help and learned how to build their own racks, and then they became a network engineer, and that happens, and now they work in the same space. So it's full of contradictory statements, and yeah, that's the messiness of life, I guess.
Okay, let's take one last question from Hedvig.
Okay, so my questions have kind of been building up as the talk progressed, so it's threefold. One is just a very small follow-up on something, Anisha, you said, which is when you were talking about internships and hiring a generalist, you mentioned that you might even look for people with publications. So I was going to ask, is it important to have publications to get into industry jobs? That's the first question. Second question is, I know in academia, you sort of sometimes have more liberty to kind of answer your own questions, form your own questions and have the resources to answer them yourselves. Do you still get to formulate questions of your own interest in industry jobs? And then the third question, sorry for adding them all on you, is kind of about think tanks. I'm not sure if you know much about think tanks, but how would doing research at a think tank differ from doing research in the academic setting? Or would it differ at all? But those are my questions.
Okay, I will try to answer for the first question, which was, do you need publications for an industry job? My company, if we're looking for domain expertise, then how can we tell if you have domain expertise? We'll read your publications. I think Chris and Tal and Teon, you can answer for your companies what you look for. It just really depends. What was the second question again?
Do you get to ask questions of your interest in even industry job?
Yeah, again, like Tal said, I'm really lucky in that my research goals and questions align very well with my company. So I think I'm a fringe case where, yeah, I can ask some questions. And if I want answers and want to work with academics, we do collaborate with academics. So again, really lucky in this particular job. And then I don't know anything about think tanks for the last question.
I unfortunately have another meeting I have to run to, so I just want to say thank you all. This has been fun. I think for the first two questions, I also don't know anything about think tanks. I think the answer really is it depends. It's just huge variance as to whether people need publications and how much freedom you have. But certainly there are lots of jobs where you have freedom to work on, requests. It just depends. See you later.
Bye, Tal. Okay, and Tal reminds me also that we've gone a little bit long past what we told our guests that we would go, and they all have jobs, as you've heard. And so thank you very much to Chris and Teon and Anisha and Tal, of course, for taking the time to spend with us. It's been great to see you all. And I'll see everyone else here after the weekend. Have a good weekend. And I'll see you on Monday. Take care.
It's luck.